The BBC Micro was really the first computer that got me into playing games. If you're watching this, you probably know what a BBC Micro is, but on the off chance you don't, it was a computer made by British company Acorn. The BBC were looking for a computer to go into schools across the country, and Acorn beat several other British manufacturers to the deal. The BBC Micro was born, and in the 80s these were in every school. Being for educational purposes, definitely said in quotes there, many people didn't get to experience the BBC's full capabilities. They were rather expensive, so you'd rarely see one at somebody's house in those days. They started at £235 in 1982 and £335 for the more popular Model B, which equates to almost £900 adjusted for inflation, or over £1,200 for the Model B, an insane amount of money. It was mainly the other micros you'd see in people's houses, such as the more affordable ZX Spectrum. These home computers or micros were what we played most of our games on back in the 80s. There was no video game crash over here, and most people had a micro at home or knew someone with one, be it a ZX Spectrum, Amstrad or Commodore 64. Ask people which BBC games they remember, and the answers will largely be whatever they played at school. These might have been the more primitive games, but by far the most common would be the text adventures. In fact, I'm sure that most people would answer Granny's Garden to that question, a text adventure that seems to have been pretty commonly played in schools as it was educational. In my school, we had one in what was called the wet room, which was basically an art room between each pair of classrooms. In addition to playing text adventures and educational programs, we were lucky enough to have a few games on it. I remember playing Strikers Run at school for one. But where I really found my love for the BBC Micro wasn't at school, but at my friend Ali's house. He's a couple of years older than me and has a brother 10 years older. In his room, he had a BBC Micro. This was the late 80s though, so the BBC by this point wasn't new. We'd spent countless days in there playing it and listening to talking heads on his brother's hi-fi separate system. Not only did this give birth to a lifelong passion for games, but also for talking heads and hi-fi. We'd play games mainly on floppy disk, and I mean the actual bendy 5¼ inch floppy disks, not diskettes. The BBC ran games from these or from cassette tapes, which was the most common format for the micros in general. As I've delved into retro gaming again in the last 15 years or so, I've noticed people's reactions to games on the BBC Micro. I think people have this preconception of the BBC, and when they see decent games on it, they're like, wait, this is a BBC Micro game? They're surprised it's not shit. The colour palette probably did nothing to dampen these assumptions, as most games used very few colours. The BBC had several display modes, each capable of displaying a varying number of colours on screen at one time, some with as few as 2. That's a real shame because it genuinely has so much to offer. There are some belting games on the Beeb. Arcade ports like Arkanoid kept us very busy back in the day. That one was pretty colourful actually, and a very faithful conversion. Chucky Egg was a favourite, and this is quite a good demonstration of a display mode that limits the programmer to using 4 colours on screen. But 4 colours is enough if you use them cleverly, and most importantly, have a fun game. But where the BBC really shocks people isn't in having good fun games, it's in its groundbreaking games. The BBC did some pretty impressive stuff back in the 80s, especially considering it had a mere 16 kilobytes of RAM or 32 in the Model B. The most widely known and respected is arguably 1984's Elite, which was a landmark title not only on the BBC, but in games full stop. It was a vast open-ended game at a scale not seen previously, and used some clever graphical trickery, which is frankly beyond my understanding, to create a pseudo 3D universe. One perhaps lesser known was Exile, released in 1988, which pioneered physics in video games before such a term existed. It's an early example of what we would now call a Metroidvania, and featured realistic gravity and inertia and advanced AI. Seeing this back in the 80s was jaw-dropping. But as you've likely guessed from the video's title and the thumbnail, we're not here to talk about the BBC. I just felt like it needed some defending. We're here to talk about one game. One of those games that was revolutionary on the BBC in more ways than one. Imogen. Imogen was published by Micropower in 1986, but was coded by one man, Michael St. Aubin. Back in the BBC Micro days, many games were made by what they called bedroom coders, literally one person coding at home, often in their bedroom. For example, Repton was famously coded by a 15-year-old. Imogen is probably my favourite BBC Micro game. Immediately you'll notice the graphics, and that's a big part of why I gave you a little rundown on the BBC Micro graphics there. Now see, it's only displaying two colours on the screen at once, but somehow it feels graphically superior to most other games on the platform. This was down to some really clever use of line drawings, so instead of using a bunch of pixels to make a character, Imogen uses thin black lines to create its characters and objects. This not only makes them much larger and clearer, but gives the game a cartoony feel that really didn't exist in games in 1986. One other quite cartoony game on the BBC that I can think of is Frack, released in 1984, but even this uses pixels to create the character. Most detailed characters would be pixelated like we saw in Exile. In visual terms, Imogen just felt to me a world away from all the other BBC Micro games I was playing. But good graphics do not make a good game. That was something that the BBC Micro really proved, and something that's remained true even to this day. If your core gameplay is lacking, then no amount of visual excellence is ever going to compensate. The BBC had some games that were the most basic pixel art you could imagine with two colours, but the gameplay would be absolutely fantastic, and that's what counts. Imogen sits right in the middle of that particular Venn diagram, having both, and my god, did this have some good gameplay. Imogen's story follows a wizard, the titular Imogen. He's gone a bit mad after transforming himself into a dragon in order to save the townspeople from an attacking dragon. Although successful, he's been banished to a dungeon until his sanity is returned. The plot is largely irrelevant. All you need to know is the wizard is stuck in a dungeon and needs to escape. The game is split into 16 dungeons, each consisting of 4 screens. Escaping is on paper very simple. Collect this little magical spell, this wibbly set of diamonds here, and then cast the spell to head to the next level. The 16 levels are played in a random order each time. Now the wizard's party trick is transmogrifying into animals, which we already know as he turned into a dragon to save the town. He is what I suppose we would call an animagus in the Harry Potter universe. And that ability is really the core mechanic of the game. Imogen can transform into different animals in order to perform unique tasks. The monkey's skill is he can climb ropes. The monkey can also jump from ropes, but will only do so in the direction he was facing when he grabbed the rope. The cat can jump far, the wizard and monkey can only perform very small jumps, and the wizard can use items. In one level, he can also turn into a bird. The gameplay is reminiscent of the Lost Vikings in that you're essentially switching between 3 different characters on the fly. The only difference is, here it's one character transforming rather than controlling 3 individual characters. You change form by selecting the relevant icon on the menu at the top. When items are collected, they'll display to the right of the animal icons. You'll also notice a number displayed at the top right of the screen, which starts at 150 and counts down every time you transform. This is your supply of magic, meaning you have a limited number of transformations you can perform in the game. Using the spell to escape the level consumes magic too, so you could plausibly get to the very end of the 16 levels, obtain the last spell, and be left with no magic to actually activate it and escape the dungeon. This finite number of transformations is really where Imogen's difficulty comes in. Most of the levels can be completed with time and patience through trial and error, but when you're wasting precious magic on failed attempts, you'll soon find yourself lacking the magic needed to complete the game. You don't die in Imogen, you're just left without the magic needed to progress, forever doomed to reside in the dungeon. The controls couldn't be simpler. Use Z and X to move your character, and enter is sort of an action button. If walking in a direction, enter is jump, but when static, enter acts as a use item button. To navigate the bar at the top to select the animals and items, use the arrow keys and spacebar selects. Pretty simple. Most BBC Micro games use keyboard controls, and I never even saw a joystick for the Beeb as a kid, so using Z and X as left and right was extremely common and natural. As with the Lost Vikings, although a platform game, Imogen is at heart a puzzle game. Each level is a puzzle to solve. The key to success is not only working out how to get the level's spell, but working out how to do it in the fewest transformations possible, and thus consuming the least possible magic. 150 transformations may sound like a lot, but you'll need 16 just to activate the spells at the end of the levels. That leaves 134 across 16 levels, which is under 8.5 per level. That's not much at all. The puzzles vary from quite simple to rather fiendish, but even the simplest puzzles will take some thinking to minimise the transformations used. Here's an example of a very simple level that can be completed with only 3 transformations. As the monkey, climb the rope to collect the mallet, knock down the bell, push the bell into the next room, then as the wizard, use the mallet to ring the bell. This triggers a Pavlovian response in the cat, causing it to drool into the umbrella. This lifts the door, opening up access to the spell. We then transform into the cat to jump up to get it. Of course, a final bit of magic is consumed to use the spell and move on. Some levels add other animals into the mix, or variations of this weird baby. These usually do whatever they can to prevent your progress, but all operate under some basic rules, so learn their behaviour and learn how to avoid them. And this is integral really, as they can often knock you back off of a ledge or rope, meaning you'll waste precious magic transforming once or twice just to get back to where you were. The weird baby really gets quite a hard time in this game. He gets flattened by the blast of a saxophone, he gets shot. The funniest bit is when he's hanging on a balloon, floating in the air, and you have a bow and arrow, and you think you'll shoot the arrow into his balloon, but no, you just shoot it right into his stomach. So harsh. Aside from jumping, climbing and pushing objects, the mechanics all lie in the objects, and they are really fun and ingenious. Another quite simple level which illustrates the use of items is this, called Whip It, which has a double meaning as it contains both a whip and a whippet. As the monkey, collect the whip in order to subdue a dog blocking your path. Whip the dog as the wizard. As the monkey and then cat, collect this frog, whose croak opens up this barrier. Simple, but it still requires the use of all 3 forms to complete. Use of items reminds me of point and click adventure games in a way, in that you use items in a way they'd never be used in the real world, but apply a dollop of video game logic and you've got yourself a fun puzzle. But unlike point and click adventure games where you might have a vast world to explore, these puzzles are contained within 4 screens, so you'll never be too far away from the solution. I won't ruin too much, but the items in the levels are so varied. One of my favourite bits is collecting TNT in a bowl, then placing that bowl on a wooden trapdoor. You light a stick in a nearby torch and then use the flaming stick to blow up the TNT and of course the trapdoor. Some of the puzzles will have you scratching your head for a while, so it will take several attempts at a playthrough before you're confident enough for a full run using less than your full supply of 150 magic. It's not uncommon for my rose-tinted glasses to come into effect when reminiscing over these old games. Often the memory outshines the reality, but in Imogen's case, the game really does hold up. So what was the point of this video? Well, it's just a gem that I absolutely love, and one that I've been fond of since the 80s. I've been meaning to do a video on it for a while, and then saw ZX Tetlee covered it and it reminded me that I wanted to do this video. Link to his video down below if you want to see someone playing this in real time. The game very rarely gets mentioned in conversations about great BBC Micro games, and it really should. And really, I just wanted to use it to defend my beloved BBC Micro. There's just something about that era for me. It reminds me of simpler times, I guess, back when games had no flashy bells and whistles, so the gameplay had to be the main focus. But of course, I want you to play it yourself, so I'll leave a link to a BBC Micro emulator online so you can play it in your browser. There's also a 2003 remake if you'd rather track that down. Fire this game up, enjoy the simple but challenging puzzle platformer gameplay, and please do bear in mind this was developed in 1986 by one guy in his bedroom. But regardless, good gameplay speaks for itself. Maybe it'll change your mind about the capabilities of the old Beeb. Thanks for watching.